Hello everyone, it's me, Anderson West, aka Films by AW, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about a camera, the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K. I've been a Blackmagic camera user since 2020 when I bought the Pocket 6K. Yes, I know I was late to the party, but I've been in love with the camera systems ever since, and I got the 6K Pro the year after, right when it was announced, because it added a tiltable screen and the internal NDs, and I was really excited to use that camera because the image quality for so long was by far the best for your buck in terms of what you could get. It was a camera that I used on all sorts of projects, and I was really pleased with the results I could get out of it. However, there were some drawbacks. You think of the battery life, you think of the lens mount options not having, and the form factor. When you do try and plug in a battery into the 12-volt port, you've got to block your lovely 5-inch screen, which is again another benefit of this camera, having the high bright HDR 2200 nit 5-inch touchscreen monitor on the back, but you then block that with a battery. So all these things I found frustrating. I was really looking to upgrade because I wanted to experiment with different lenses. And so when the Cinema Camera 6K was announced, I was in two minds. I was underwhelmed and excited at the same time. For the first time, Blackmagic had a full frame sensor, a 36 by 24 millimeter full frame sensor that allows people to shoot in 3:2 format. And the thing about Blackmagic moving to full frame wasn't that it's going to be about the depth of field and shooting full frame. It's the different format options you now had available to you. So if you wanted to shoot 3:2 open gate in 6K, you could do that. If you want to shoot 17:9 in 6K, you could do that. If you want to shoot 6:5 for anamorphic full frame capture, you can do that. If you want to go into 4:3 in Super 35 and still be in 4K, again, you can do that, as well as a 17:9 4K S35 mode. In fact, it's one of the few cameras that can shoot both full frame in 6K and shoot Super 35 in 4K. Not many cameras, especially at this price range, can do that. And again, it's another flexible option. And of course, it has internal RAW. There was a lot of flexibilities there. And with the new sensor size came a new lens mount, the L mount, which the short flange distance meant that you can adapt more lenses than ever before in a Blackmagic camera. You know, you could use an L mount to EF mount to adapt those old EF lenses, or an L mount to PL mount that allowed you to use cinema lenses on this camera. So again, it opened out that flexibility, but it came at a price. No more internal NDs, one of the main selling points of the Pocket 6K Pro. But I can only imagine it was down to having to use the same body format, which again was another weaknesses, because the same battery life issues that we had with the 6K Pro and the wide form factor, which makes it hard to mount in gimbals. So again, it was a bit underwhelming. However, my friends from ProAV let me borrow the camera for a number of weekends to use it on a short film that I was making, in which we were shooting on Alexa 35. And the reason I wanted to use a Cinema 6K was because I felt we needed a smaller camera to fit in tighter spaces as we were shooting on a bus, and then for the occasional gimbal shot, because I didn't have the budget to get a Ronin 2, I felt, okay, the Cinema 6K can get us into the same ballpark. And I was even more impressed by what we got. I've got two shots here, one from the Alexa 35 and one from the Cinema 6K. These were different takes in which we swapped the lenses, so you could see how similar they were able to look, and I'll go into later why that was possible. But again, it got close enough in the ballpark that I thought to myself, this is a really useful camera system. And again, we use it in several instances on the short film. And look, I'm not saying it looks exactly like an Alexa 35. The fact that this 2,000 or 1,500 pound camera or $1,500 camera gets in even the same ballpark, I think is incredible. Months after this camera was announced, they announced the Pyxis 6K, which is essentially the same exact camera internals, but in a box modular form factor. I was stoked and I pre-ordered it straight away. I was really looking forward to having that Komodo style form factor, as I'd used the Komodo several times and I loved my shooting experience on that. However, then these had a worldwide sale from Blackmagic. You know, here in the UK, the price went from £2,100 to £1,500. And I know in the US, it went from $2,500 to $1,500. When I compared the price of the Pyxis to the Cinema 6K, I had to take the plunge, and I am not disappointed. This camera I find is a really useful tool. And one of the first shoots I took my personal Cinema 6K out on was a shoot for a friend of mine. Well, it was a BTS shoot for his short film, in which I just got run and gun type shots, and I went around getting some shots for his behind the scenes for his film. Now, I was really pleased with what I was able to shoot. The colors, handling the different light sources, you know, we were on the fluorescence, inside, outside. And I really liked how it handled the different colors. And for me, the colors look so rich. And again, Blackmagic, they understand color science so well. So the colors I felt were so rich. Now, you know, some would say you shouldn't use this camera in a run and gun verite type situations. There are better options out there, but I didn't have them. This is the camera I had. And I was very impressed with what I was able to do. There was a few things I had to do in post-production, but on the whole, I was really happy with what I was able to capture. Some of the downsides of the camera. I've already talked about the lack of internal NDs, but there is something that we could do to mitigate that. But the other weakness of the camera is the low light. Now, with a full frame camera, you would assume it would be cleaner in low light. This camera's low light is worse than the 6K Pro. I'm not sure why, but it is. I've got a comparison here of a couple of low light situations. You know, they're probably slightly underexposed anyway and push the cameras too far, but you can see here, without any noise reduction, it is noisier than the 6K Pro. Now, it's not the end of the world, and there's some things you can do in post to mitigate that, but again, it's disappointing. Now, this camera is like the Pocket 6K and the 6K Pro, in which it has two base ISOs. You could choose ISOs between 100 and 1000 that will all base the dynamic range on that base ISO of 400. And then once you go to 1250 and up, the base ISO switches to 3200. But personally, I don't like to go above 1250, even on the Pocket 6Ks. And I wouldn't recommend going above it on this camera. So the low light is a weakness for me. It's nowhere near the low light monsters of the FX6 or the FX3 or any of the Sony cameras. But again, it's about knowing the limitations of your camera. Now, another weakness of the camera is the slow sensor readout. It is slower than most of the full frame cameras, especially in open gate mode. For me, it's not as big as an issue because, you know, some of the most widely used cameras in broadcast, the FX9, has a similar sensor readout in full frame that this camera does. And that's used on news gathering programs all around the world. The other weakness is it only shoots in RAW. Now, I don't think this is 100% a weakness, but some people that wanted to have a quick turnaround in ProRes, it will be a weakness for them. For me, there's reasons why it's actually a pro, and I'm going to come back to that later. One of the other weaknesses of the camera is that it doesn't have a lot of high frame rate options. You know, in open gate 3x2, the highest frame rate you can go is to 36 frames per second. When you go down to 17.9 6K, which most people will probably use, it goes to 48, which is double speed in the US if you're shooting 24. But here in Europe, we normally shoot 25 frames per second, so 50 would have been nice, but it goes to 48. But then if you go down to S35 mode, you can get up to 50 frames per second. I've got the list here. Now, you can crop down into a Super 16 mode and a 1080 mode, and you get up to 120 frames per second. But for me, these modes are not something you want to be using very often. And if you do use them, probably go to the highest raw compression you can, because otherwise they're really noisy. And I'm not a fan of cropping this far into the sensor. And then the other weakness is it carries on the same form factor that the 6K Pro had. It has the battery life issue. It has all that. It shares those issues with the 6K Pro. Now, going into pros, Blackmagic RAW at first, being the only format in this camera, you think is a weakness. But in reality, it's actually a pro to this. Now, I like to think of this camera as a camera in two halves, the camera on shoot and the camera in post. Because this camera comes with a free copy of DaVinci Resolve, you're actually able to do some things that allow you to mitigate some of those weaknesses. So in DaVinci Resolve, with the slow sensor readout and the jello effect and the skewed footage that you get when you're panning, you can actually mitigate that because RAW records the gyroscope data. So the gyroscope that you use and make sure your footage is level is actually measuring where the camera is for you. So in DaVinci Resolve, it can then process that data and help you to stabilize your footage in a similar way that an FX6 would use Sony Catalyst. But it doesn't just stabilize your footage, it can also minimize the skewed rolling shutter artifacts. Here, I was able to get rid of some of the skewed, slow sensor readout type footage in which I'm panning, and you can see it's really noticeable. It cleans up a lot of those rolling shutter artifacts, and it just wouldn't have been possible in ProRes. Now, another bonus to RAW is the noise reduction. I had some footage here, it was shot for me, but ISO 1000 is really noisy. I thought it was unusable. But then running it through the noise reduction in DaVinci Resolve, yes, it's processor intensive, but what it did allow for was the footage to be usable. Again, it's some smoothing there and it's not the same quality, and it would have been better if the footage in the first place was much cleaner at low light. But in a pinch, it can save you and make that footage usable. Now, yes, you could do this with any camera's footage in DaVinci Resolve, but as this comes free with the camera, I thought I might make use of it, and again, it helps. Now, the final thing that's a real bad bonus to shooting in RAW is that you can change the color space of your camera. You know, earlier I was able to show the footage that looked similar to Alexa 35, but it was because we could change the color space to match the Arri log curve. This Alexa footage isn't graded, but after changing the gamma curve and the color space, I was able to apply the same Rec 709 LUT that I used on the Alexa 35 on the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K. So when they're graded, at least the colorist has a base point to start both of the cameras on. The other downside of RAW is the file sizes, and for some projects, it's not going to be feasible to keep the footage in RAW. So I have a workflow in which I let DaVinci color manage the RAW footage to have a Rec 709 LUT. I apply the gyro stabilization to get rid of the rolling shutter, and then I export to H.265.422. This massively reduces the file sizes. This allows me to take the BRAW files off my main hard drive and onto long-term LTO storage. So if I need it for the future for a grade, then I can come back to it. But more often than not, most clients are happy with how this looks with maybe a tweak here and there in the look, which the H.265 files would allow for. If you're looking to hand the footage off and you're not able to transcode it beforehand, this is not the right camera for you at all, because you'll be spending hours transcoding to ProRes or another format. Now, with the other weakness of not having internal NDs, with the L mount, you're now able to get more lens mount adapters that can translate it to other mounts that allow you to have drop-in or behind the lens NDs. So a great example of this is the Mofage Poco L to PL adapter. So you can fit quite a lot of lenses and you're able to have that behind the lens ND variable or a hard stop ND. The Mofage is a great option, and my friend, that camera nerd, Markachevsky, has done a review in the Mofage Poco. Go to his channel and check it out. Now, for L to EF, there actually isn't any L to EF lens adapters that have a drop-in VND or ND module. However, Breakthrough Filters is making an L to EF module that you can make use of the same VND and hard stop NDs in their L to PL adapters. And that's going to become available very soon. I think the price is going to be £400 or £500 plus the cost of the filter. Or you can get a front of the lens ND if you so wish. And the final benefit is that the media is now cheaper and faster. They've moved on from CFast 2.0 to now CFX Express Type B, which is cheaper and faster. Now, all the inputs are the same as a 6K Pro. So you have 3.5 audio jack in, headphone jack, HDMI, and then you have the 2 mini XLRs and the 12 volt input and USB-C out. So again, you have lots of options there. The 12 volt allows you to connect external power to it through either mains or V-Lock or however you want to power it. Again, the battery is MPF is as same as before. Personally, I don't like to rig my cameras out. I like to keep it quite simple. So I have 12 NPFs that I take on shoot with me, which is excessive, but it is what it is, and I prefer that way. For me, this camera is a camera that allows me as a filmmaker to experiment with different lenses, different scenarios, situations. With the anamorphic modes in full frame and in S35, really opens up lots of lenses, and it being both 6K full frame and 4K S35 means I can use some of the lenses that I've used for years and love using and still be in at least 4K, which a lot of cameras at this price point don't offer. You could see the anamorphic footage I've shot with it, and then some documentary style footage I've shot with it. And for me, what this shows is a camera that's flexible. It's a camera that allows filmmakers to experiment, because lenses are what changes the look of your films, not your cameras. And I think with this camera, it allows you to stay with that amazing Blackmagic interface that's so easy to use, that great color science, and then that simplicity. For me, because the camera is so cheap, I'm still not afraid of renting larger cameras or working with DPs that bring their own camera to set and may not want to use this camera. But then I also feel confident that if they say, hey, actually, have you got a spare camera I can put my existing PL lens on, I can go, yeah, I've got the Cinema 6K that I can use as a B cam to your Mini LF or Alexa 35 or whatever, and we can get a great image out of it. So I think it's a really flexible option for filmmakers. And if you're looking for something that has that Komodo shape, but you still want that color science, the Pyxis exists now. But this camera, for the price, already comes with the screen. It kind of already has the grip for you to use it in that run and gun fashion. It is actually good value for money. So why don't you guys let me know in the comments, what do you think of the Cinema 6K? Are you looking to buy one? Do you have one? Have you been using it? How have you found it? Let me know in the comments. And if you're seeing this video and want to buy a Cinema 6K, why not head to Pro AV in the UK? They're the best place you can get it. I am an affiliate of Pro AV, but they're a wonderful company, and they're guys that are really helpful, and they'll help you find any solutions you need for your camera systems. And buying it from these links, it does help support the channel. Thanks again for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time, and remember, stay shooting.